Making you last is all I care to do. You loving me, I loving you. Mothers and fathers, husbands and wives, sisters and brothers, friends for life, won't live in the past. All I wanna do now is making it last. Mothers and fathers, sisters and brothers, friends forever, strengthening the ties that keep us together.
What are the warning signs of an abusive relationship? That's what we're going to be talking about. And I'm loving this topic, and I'll tell you why. I really don't think it's something we talk about enough, because sometimes some of us might end up being in an abusive relationship and we don't even know. We're going to be talking to Suzanne O'Million. She's an attorney and author. She's a workshop facilitator who has worked with women who have experienced domestic violence, sexual assault, and abuse, and other kinds of trauma. Welcome, Suzanne.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
What are the warning signs of an abusive relationship? And yeah, let me leave it at that. Then I'm going to have a follow-up question.
Okay. So there are a number of warning signs that have been, I guess, better articulated. I don't know that they haven't been around for a long time, these signs, but we haven't had really clear words for them. The most obvious one to most people is physical violence. That if in a relationship there is a partner, and sometimes it's been described as mutual combat, but usually there's a perpetrator and a victim, and that could include yelling and screaming and tossing things around, destroying her things particularly, intimidating, and grabbing and kicking and stalking with unwanted phone calls or social media contacts. So that's usually how most people see abuse in a relationship. But there are other kinds that have been defined more in terms of emotional abuse. Some people call it psychological abuse. Some people call it coercive control. And those are usually insulting language, calling her names, belittling her in public and in private, isolating her from family and friends. I don't want you to see those people because they're just going to turn your head against me. Wanting to know where she is all the time, texting her, calling her out, using GPS to find her, invading privacy on the cell phones or by the email or texting, and then finally refusing to accept the end of a relationship and maybe stalking her long after she has said, no, I don't want to be with you anymore. Those are usually those will appear in many kinds of relationships, even dating relationships where you're not cohabitating with someone, or it could be in a long-term marriage or where there is cohabitation. And but particularly in those longer-term relationships or where you have merged your finances or you are living together and sharing expenses, there could be economic abuse, which means that one party is controlling access to the money. Usually the male will do that. He refuses to pay the bills or take care of the bills, so that there's a lot of financial struggle and instability. Sometimes it happens where the man will try to keep her from getting a job or keeping a job or deciding which job it will be, that kind of control. And then finally, a real, what we call male privilege, the idea that he will make all the big decisions. He will get his way. He wants her to subscribe to his view of the world and how he is the center of that world. And then finally, that idea that going back to psychological, kind of making her feel a little crazy. There's a word that's been called gaslighting. She thinks things are this way, but he tells her they're that way, and she's kind of really lost in this fog. Pushing the relationship too far, too fast, being obsessed with her. And sometimes people talk about that too as narcissistic abuse, where he is the center of that universe and everything revolves around him. And if it's not happening that way, then he will take either abusive steps or even physically abusive steps against her. And then finally, sexual violence in the relationship. In many states in the United States, marital rape is a crime. So even if you're married, you have the option. You don't have to give consent every time to have sex. But it's also the whole idea that this becomes a really potent way that he can make demands and exert control, and in some cases even force the woman to become pregnant when she doesn't want to do that. So the idea that there's a large control base, and I have in the introduction that you gave me, which was lovely, one thing that I should have added is that I also have worked with male domestic violence offenders.
Oh.
I have done groups with men who have been arrested for usually lower levels of misdemeanor, kind of slapping or kicking or disrupting, loud noises. And they come into a class. In the classes I taught were about 20 weeks, and we start to help them see that they might be able to change their behavior. So a lot of times they would talk to me about these warning signs and like, well, she does that too, and I never do that. She says I do, and I don't know why that's so bad. I mean, my mother did that to me when I was a kid, and it was okay. So people not understanding that the impact this has on a person's self-esteem. And I've had women tell me who've been in both physically abusive and emotionally abusive relationships that the emotional abuse is far more devastating to the psyche. It really gets in there and makes you feel like you are just not a person of any value. And it's almost like that tearing down of the other person builds the man up. And the way that men are socialized in our society and the way women are socialized in our society is that men are always putting their anger out there. That's the one expression of emotion they're allowed. And women, we are much more open about our emotions, and men don't get that. This is hurtful behavior, and not only to the woman that may be in the relationship, but the children who might be witnessing this. And then where does that go? So in many, many cases, the warning signs that are more identified in our society are that physical abuse. But the impact and the presence of emotional and economic and psychological and sexual abuse is also really important. And so some women say to me, well, he doesn't hit me, so I must be okay. I'm not in danger. But you don't know that. You don't know when that pressure point's going to happen. And I've had men talk about that. I went into this rage and everything went crazy and black, and I don't know why I did what I do. And in fact, some of them who were either on alcohol or drugs won't even remember what they did until they read the police report.
Wow.
The police told me that I hit her with an iron. I mean, I can't believe I did that, but I guess I did. Because they have no control over that.
That was, well, once again, you've almost basically answered the question I was going to ask, because even though one of the first things you said was physical violence, what then if it is that somebody's in a relationship and it happened once? What would be your advice for that particular person? It's not ongoing. The person, the partner got angry and did something physical. What would be your advice for that?
My advice is that that's a red flag going up or down, however you say it, a bell going off. That may not be repeated, but it might. And the urge to do that, the physical urge for somebody to go to reach a level of anger and lose control, is not something that another person can control.
Okay.
So the question that I would say is that, if you've known this person for 45 years and this is the first time that he's ever done this, I guess that would be a situation where it might not be cause for alarm. But it might be that this is a behavior that's been hidden for a while. It might be something more, in a mental state that can be repeated. it usually is a situation where one should question or take a moment back or seek some help to say, this is what just happened and here's how it feels to me. It's kind of similar to what I've also done work on sexual harassment in the workplace. And, where employers say, well, it only happened one time, well, you don't know that. And you don't know, you also don't know the impact on the victim. She might be a sexual assault victim from way back. And suddenly in the workplace, some guy is making these sexual comments and touching her in a sexual way. And that's a very big deal for her. May not be for somebody else, but the same thing in relationships. You don't know what that might trigger, and it might trigger something in the victim that could also cause there to be an extent, not only a reaction to her mentally, but maybe even physically. So those are not things that you should sort of pass off. I'm not saying that it is a sign of anything really bad, but remember, men are socialized to show their anger only, whether they're, angry, whether they're angry and hurt or angry and sad or angry and whatever. And women have more ability. We're socialized to express all of our emotions. And so seeing him focus on just one expression of anger in a physical way is really quite, for a man, is quite a sign, I would say. And you don't want to hang around and wait to see what's going to happen next.
I know you've been enjoying the conversation, but we're going to take a little break and get a word from our sponsor.
For all your events, such as educational forums, workshops, book launches, weddings, and more, contact Noreen Daly, the ultimate MC and event host. Visit NoreenDaly.com or follow her on Instagram at Noreen Daly Jam. Noreen Daly, creating long-lasting memories.
Earlier you said that one other warning sign is the whole idea of emotional abuse and invasion of privacy. Now there's several apps that are available now when somebody wants to know where somebody else is. Now, how then do you know are you clear that this is just because I want to make sure that you're safe, as opposed to I just want to know everywhere you are?
I think there's a really thin line between those two thoughts.
Okay.
And I most men that I have talked to me, because if I've talked to men who've been arrested for those kind of things, and I will ask them that question, like, why was this so important for you to know? And they'll give me this, oh, I love her so much, I want to make sure she's okay. And then I say to you, do you know how that feels for her? And like, well, she should be happy that no, she feels like you're invading her privacy and that you have violated her. And in fact, particularly if she has asked you to leave her alone, even if it's for a temporary period of time. So I think what men have to understand is that is not always how women feel. That, it could be that I have a loving husband. He wants to know where I am all the time. Those kind of devices have been very, very dangerous for women, and it has been a problem in the domestic violence work and sexual assault, stalking. Even police can't track down some of these things, and they put them on your computer, and they put it on your car, and they put it everywhere. And sometimes it's just scary to know if it's for this benevolent, I want to help you and protect you, or it's I need to know where you are right now because I'm in control. And if I think where you are is not appropriate, I'm going to go do something about it. It really depends how the relationship is going. And I do know some men who, are very protective of their wife, but there's a line there, and it's pretty clear.
All right. So somebody's listening and they're saying, okay, I've seen these warning signs, but it is not so easy for me to leave because this is my husband. This is the provider for the family. And I've been with him for, X amount of years. Yep. What is your advice? Is it that you're saying once there are these warning signs, people just need to just up and leave, find a safe haven? or see if somehow behaviors can be changed? What's your advice?
There's a very, very difficult questions to answer. And I'm not saying for me, but for a whole raft of people,
Okay.
from crisis intervention workers and victim advocates, police departments, and there's always the case where the situation that seems, the cleanest break, and then something else happens. I think it is very hard to leave in a relationship, particularly, and why women don't leave is very clear. Economics. And I have women in my group who have left relationships where they literally have been financially ruined by doing so, and their children have not been properly supported by the father. But they also knew that if they stayed, the chances were getting clearer and clearer that this was not a relationship that was safe, not only for them, the women, but also for their children. Because children sometimes will, particularly as they get older, will step in between.
True.
And can also get hurt.
Yeah.
So it's a really big calculation. My advice is to call a domestic violence hotline. There are a number in the United States here. They're usually state by state. I'm looking, there's a national line too, and begin, just talk to somebody, somebody who has some experience of this. It's the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence in this country, in the United States, that has a hotline, and they're usually listed on the websites, the National Domestic Violence Hotline or the National Sexual Assault, and to get a little bit of, advice and have somebody talk it through with you as to what you think the signs are. And there are shelters that will shelter you, particularly if you don't have another safe place to go. And most of the shelters, although sometimes they're not so confidential from the men, from the perpetrators, but there are shelters you can go to and be safe there for some period of time. But it is that journey, and realizing that if you do leave that relationship, there are going to be downsides, perhaps economically and also emotionally. And your children will suffer. Then even if you can clear yourself in that relationship, then how you relate to the father, the children relate to the father, and visitation. So it is not an easy path. But for many of the women that I have worked with who have left, and I've met them just when they've left or years later, say that the emotional burden on them of staying in that relationship became so clear. And in fact, when they got out, they realized how much that emotional burden, that abuse, that emotional psychological abuse was really, really taking away their self-esteem and their ability to function. So was it easy to leave? No. Would they have wanted another option? But the options were pretty clear. And sometimes the other question I get asked a lot, just to give you another question, I'm asked a lot, particularly when I was doing offender groups, is can people who are abusers, mostly I was working with men, can they change?
Oh, no, you're in my head. Susan, you're in my head, because that was the final question I was going to ask, because we were talking about what I want. No.
Are you ready for the final question?
No, you're literally in my head, because I was about to ask if it is that somebody who has abused over a period, been the abuser, if at some point that person can actually change. No, come out of my head. Come out.
I'm sorry. I wasn't even playing. I just thought, that's probably a good question.
Yeah.
So that's a tough one. One of the questions that, you ask, why do women stay? The other tough question that is sort of related to the one you asked is, why does he do this? Why does he act that way? And I've asked men in my groups, like, do you think that's going to give you love? Are you going to get love by treating her that way? And they're like, well, but I really love her, but she's doing things I don't like, so I have to make her do something else. Well, that's not going to give you love. So they somehow think that this either behavior is not going to make a difference, or that a woman's going to love them in spite of it. I don't know a lot of women who would, and maybe they'll pretend they do, or they'll stay like they do. I think people who are abusive, and I work mostly with men, although I've done a little bit of work with women who've been arrested for domestic violence, but that's a very kind of a different situation. But I don't think they can change by just waking up one morning and saying, oh, I think I'm going to be a better man. A lot of these men don't have great role models. If you ask them who their role model was growing up as to how to be a man, their father wasn't around and he wasn't a really good guy. And my teacher or my coach in school, I think it will take therapy. It'll take a lot of digging. Okay. It'll take some classes. And even then, it's going to be a challenge. And I have met men, I've worked with men in these offender programs who were former abusers, and they will tell you that right away. They will tell you that it's a journey for me. I have to work at it all the time. I've examined some of the things that happened to me as a child. I've examined some of the ways that I've acted, and not only towards my spouses, but my children. Mm-hmm. And I even question some of it, but it's a lifelong journey. And some men will take that journey, but a lot will say, okay, I'm done with her. Let's find somebody else. And they will have multiple relationships, none of which are successful. And at some point, they'll keep blaming the women. Well, she wasn't a good person. But to take that kind of journey, to make those kind of changes, that's it's a very proud journey if you can accomplish it, but it's a tough one. So, and men aren't encouraged in our society to do that. Maybe a little bit more so these days. I think with younger men, there's more role models for how to be respectful of women and have good relationships. But there's still a lot that our society condones and actually encourages in some ways about the way, but none of the way men are socialized, but also how men don't really have to be the one to make the change.
I know you've been enjoying the conversation, but we're going to take a little break and get a word from our sponsor.
Does your business lack branding? Having difficulty realizing your vision? Look no further. Splinth Brand Design Consultancy specializes in developing personal and business brands. Services include strategic management, website creation, social media branding, and more. Visit them online at www.wearesplint.com. Splinth, the brand you need to succeed.
We will be having more conversations. So I will definitely be in touch. Thanks for sharing, Suzanne.
Oh, thank you so much. I've really enjoyed it. And you had great questions, even though I figured them out ahead of time.
Not a problem. Right. This was Making It Last podcast, where it's all about helping us to have better relationships, not just with ourselves, but with other people. I'm Noreen Daly. Until next time.
Making it last is all I care to do. You loving me, I loving you. Mothers and fathers, husbands and wives, sisters and brothers, friends for life.